There was a time when Star Wars was not only a premier movie franchise and certainly toy franchise, it was certainly a premier comic book franchise. In fact, I think the first issue of Star Wars #1 actually preceded the movie, although it's completely based on the movie and all that kind of stuff. But Star Wars has been a comic book franchise for a very, very long time, and it's been hot for a very, very long time, but it has been struggling under Marvel Comics ever since, obviously, Dark Horse lost the license. Disney decided to bring it in-house to Marvel once they acquired the company. You know, and all that kind of stuff makes sense, I guess. And there certainly have been some bangers out there. Don't let me sell you that nothing Marvel done with Star Wars since they reacquired the license has been good, because that would be a lie. In fact, I would say the 2 Darth Vader series before Greg Pak's, which is about to end. The first one from Kieran Gillen is absolutely superb, like A1, really, really good stuff. The Charles Soule one that follows it is also really, really good. And I believe during the Kieran Gillen era, when Jason Aaron was also writing the flagship Star Wars book, we got the Vader Down story. If you've never read that one and you're an enormous fan of Star Wars, you are missing out, my friends, because that is a fantastic story. Easily, and I do not say that lightly, because there have been some things that have happened, under Disney that I've liked. Easily the best new Star Wars story released, created, under the Disney umbrella. And I like Rogue One. I actually just went and rewatched it again, and I liked it a lot. And I was reminded of a lot of things that I liked. I really liked the robot in there. We get to see a lot of cool things that really never happened in the movies before, and I find it quite enjoyable. A lot of people like The Mandalorian Season 1, and I still say Vader Down is the one. Absolutely badass. So they certainly have the ability to create good Star Wars. This last round, it's not really a reboot, like a relaunch of Star Wars with really Charles Soule back as like the #1 guy, has not been very good. I didn't think the Star Wars book was good from the very beginning. I didn't really like the Darth Vader book from the very beginning. I did like the Bounty Hunters book for quite some time. But once you got into like War of the Bounty Hunters or whatever that thing was, that kind of ruined that book. And there just hasn't been a whole lot of good Star Wars stuff other than like one-offs here and there. It's time to reboot everything and move to a new era, because they've been essentially between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which is a constrained time period. And I just don't think Charles Soule did a very good job. And I think Dark Droids is absolutely embarrassing, but not nearly as embarrassing as the High Republic initiative that they've been trying to do in comic books and novels and all that kind of stuff. Charles Soule also wrote a couple of novels. That's where you get a lot of Cavan Scott. Absolute bore fest right there. That's where Justina Ireland really got her first breaks. Not really with Marvel, but certainly with the Star Wars brand. And obviously she's moving over to Spider-Man. So let's get up to date on this new era that they're going to and why I think this is such an abysmal idea. Earlier this month, it was announced Marvel Star Wars comic line would be concluding its post The Empire Strikes Back storytelling this September in Star Wars #50 and Darth Vader 50. Fans won't have to wait long to discover what comes next, as this October, a new post-Return of the Jedi era begins in Star Wars Battle of Jakku, Insurgency Rising, written by acclaimed award-winning author Alex Segura and drawn by a trio of superstar artistic talents, Leonard Kirk, Stefano Raphael, and Jethro Morales. Star Wars Battle of Jakku, Insurgency Rising will be the first of 3 limited series centered around the never-before-told final moments of the Galactic Civil War. First of all, I think it's a weird name. Star Wars Battle of Jakku is not a comic book that exists. So why are they throwing like an extra title on the end to differentiate it from the first one? I know it's like a Battlefront game or something, but comics and Battlefront and video games aren't exactly the same thing. So why isn't it just Star Wars Battle of Jakku? But now it's Insurgency Rising. Alex Segura, probably more interesting at this point than Charles Soule. He just kind of fell off the map. Certainly more interesting writer than Cavan Scott or Justina Ireland and a lot of the other people that have been, infesting the Star Wars comic book brand as of late. The real big names there to get excited for, obviously, are the artists themselves. Leonard Kirk is awesome. Jethro Morales is really good. Stefano Raphael, also a really good artist. I'm kind of surprised that they're on this book. I don't really like what I think of their style. I think those guys should be doing Batman books rather than Star Wars books. But it is going to be like a civil war in the aftermath of the victory on Endor and all that stuff. So I guess it'll be a bit more gritty, maybe a little bit dirtier and stuff like that. So we're going to bridge the gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Now, obviously, there's plenty of stories that have been told in this time frame. Of course, none of them are really canon at this point because they wiped out the EU and Heir to the Empire and all that amazing stuff that's created, and the original, Thrawn trilogy and all that stuff, and the restoration of the Jedi Academy and all those wonderful things that were created, not only in comic books, but certainly in novels and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff has been wiped out, so you're taking what was a pretty filled out history and redoing it, but you're leading to something terrible, which I don't think is the world's greatest idea, but it's the one that Marvel Comics have come up with for their new era of Star Wars comics. First introduced in Star Wars The Force Awakens as Rey scavenged amongst its wreckage, the Battle of Jakku was a pivotal turning point for the galaxy. On the sandy dunes of Jakku, the remnants of the Empire made their desperate last stand after their secret base was discovered by the Rebellion, who were determined to destroy them once and for all so that the New Republic can thrive. Now fans will witness this pivotal moment in Star Wars canon for the first time ever, starring core characters like Luke and Leia, as well as new heroes and villains who were instrumental during this thrilling period. The 3 Battle of Jakku series will bridge the gap between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy like never before, revealing key insights behind the aftermath of the Battle of Endor and the Empire's demise, including the Emperor's secret contingency plans, which I guess rolled out in the Rise of Skywalker in infamous fashion. It's still a really, really weird moment. I wish I'd never seen that movie. I never planned to, but I did it to review it here for the channel. I just think it's a really weird place to go into, and you see the covers, and obviously it's going to be a lot of Luke and Leia and Han, but you're also going to get a lot of like Poe Dameron's parents and shit like that. And I just don't think that's a great time period to go through, because nobody wants to get to the conclusion where the sequel trilogy exists and is real. And I think filling in the gap just solidifies it in canon in a way that more than anything will just turn off Star Wars fans. I just would have went to a different time period, either before or 5,000 years in the future, where you could have something else happening that didn't remind people that they were heading towards The Force Awakens and then ultimately The Last Jedi, which I do find problematic. Personally, I think it's one of the worst movies ever made. The Rise of Skywalker might technically be a worse made movie than the Last Jedi, but I find The Last Jedi just so overwhelmingly destructive to Star Wars lore, and really even the fan base on a whole, that I find it more odious, even though I can acknowledge that watching The Rise of Skywalker was painful just because of how it was done. It was done so poorly. It had to like fast forward through the stories or whatever. And I just don't think the Empire on their last legs trying to survive the rebellion as the big guys. The rebellion's not supposed to be like the overwhelming favorite to win. And it kind of messes up the dynamics of the story and the story that you want to tell. It's almost like if you read that Predator #1 from Ed Brisson, like 3 years ago, when they finally got the Predator and Alien license, they did Predator. And the first thing they did was introduce this female human character whose parents had been killed by predators and had been hunting down predators ever since and had like 15 of their skulls. It was like, I guess I'm supposed to be rooting for the Predator not to get killed. You know, in this case, the Empire going back to Jakku and their secret base because they've been overwhelmed and destroyed at every step of the way. Probably not the most Star Wars-y story in the world, but I guess it's one that they want to tell. Sounds like Charles Soule maybe is moving on, at least from the comic books, which I don't think is a terrible idea. I don't think Alex Segura is a big enough name or really even talented enough to spearhead an event like this. Perhaps he's just doing this first story before someone else comes through that actually has some name cachet. I will check this out because I read almost all the Star Wars comics, or I did all the #1 issues up to a certain point before I kind of tapped out. But if they're going to change time periods, I'll go and see what's going on and see if maybe I like it. But I'm not nearly as black-pilled as a lot of other people when it comes to Star Wars. So I'll check it out, but my expectations couldn't be any lower just because of the era that they're going to, bridging the gap between the greatest trilogy in movie history to the biggest disappointment in movie history. Probably not something a lot of people are looking forward to, but that is not all. We also have another series announced that would be right in my wheelhouse until we get to the creators. Marvel Comics revealed the Ewoks are getting their own 4-issue series from Steve Orlando this October. Titled Star Wars Ewoks, the series will take place in the aftermath of Return of the Jedi, as the Ewoks must once again stand against a caravan of carnage to save their home. The first issue drops in comic shops on October 9th. A team of Imperial-led bounty hunters and scavengers arrive on the forest moon of Endor's restoration of the Jedi Order. Searching for a secret cache of Imperial weaponry, are they prepared to face off against the battle-ready Ewoks who took down so many of their ranks? Who is the mysterious new warrior Ewok returning to Bright Tree Village? And what is their connection to Wicket W. Warwick? Oh my goodness. Wicket's deadbeat dad is finally going to come back. And he's going to try and win him over. And he's going to be like a secret agent of the Empire. I could already see it. It happened in the Garfield movie or whatever. Something stupid like that. I'm all in on Star Wars Ewoks. It would actually be very difficult for me. It would actually be very difficult for Marvel to announce something associated with this. Or be like, you know what? I'm not even going to read the first issue. Steve Orlando is one of those things. He's absolutely terrible. And as bad as he is, he's made a billion times worse at Marvel Comics because he gets no oversight, no editorial direction, and he's left to his own devices. And Steve Orlando, left to his own devices, is amongst the worst writers in the history of comic books. The dude just sucks at writing comic books. So I normally would check out all #1 issues, and certainly with the new era, but I know who Steve Orlando is. Other names that you could put on something like this that would make me go, not now, not in a million years. Obviously, Mark Waid, that's not going to happen. Probably Steve Fox, although admittedly his X-Men 97 comic book is strikingly average and readable. Not great, but it's readable. But, you know, Celeste Brockman on one of these books. Maybe Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly on a book like this would make me not want to check it out. But Steve Orlando is right up there with the biggest warning signs in all of comic books that this is going to read like crap. And so there you go. It's something I would normally be interested in. And, you know, I remember as a kid, you know, obviously I grew up in the 80s, The Empire Strike. The Return of the Jedi was a really big deal. And I know in hindsight, a lot of people hate the Ewoks. I don't think The Return of the Jedi is the best movie of the trilogy. It's still probably the weakest, but I still think it's a damn good movie. It's still really, really good. You know, there are a few trilogy films out there that actually compete with it. You know, I would say Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade is probably better. Well, I would say Return of the King as well. But there aren't a lot of like trilogy films that round it out that are stronger than that one. It still holds up. It's still great. And I don't have a problem with the Ewoks. I think the Ewoks are great. I watched Caravan of Courage when I was a kid. It was an event. I think it was on TBS or whatever. There's another one out there that I remember watching as a kid, and I watched the cartoons, Ewoks. They had the Star Wars Hour or whatever, Power Hour, with the droids cartoon. So this is something that hits me right in my nostalgia feel spots and gives me that comic book stiffy that I'm always looking for until you see Steve Orlando. And then you're like, oh, well, never mind. Even though this is something that's near and dear to my heart and certainly is something I should be interested in, I know who he is. He is who he thought he was, a terrible comic book writer. So that is at least the initial information we have on this new era of Star Wars comic books. We're leaving the Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi era. I think it's completely unfulfilled promise, although it's an era I probably wouldn't have gone to anyway, because you are very constricted on what you can do with the characters. We know who lives and dies and appears and all that kind of stuff. I just don't think Dark Droids was the answer. They probably should have went somewhere earlier on in the time period. But I do firmly believe that going between The Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens is an even worse idea in a time period I just don't believe a lot of Star Wars fans. And those are the people that you're going to be counting on to show up en masse, not just to read the comic book, but to buy the variant covers and all the nostalgia with the toys and stuff, all that, are going to want to see that. It's not unexplored territory that people want to know what happened. I think they want to forget that the sequel trilogy ever happened, but Disney won't let that happen for reasons. I guess they can't admit they were wrong. So I'll check out the first issue. We'll see what happens. I imagine there's going to be at least 5 more series coming out around this time frame, fleshing all this stuff out. Hopefully they bring in some talent. I would love to be wowed. I would love to be proven wrong about all this stuff and love Star Wars at Marvel Comics once again not feeling that this is going to be that era, but I am willing to have my eyes open and my mind changed. If you'd like more coverage on Star Wars and lots of geek conversations about nostalgia and obviously Indiana Jones and the Ghostbusters and all that stuff, we have the Geek Fix on Think Critical Patreon. If you like what we're doing here and you want to support our mission and what we're trying to accomplish here on YouTube, you go to the Patreon, you support the tier that you're interested in. Hopefully that is the Sparrow's Never-Ending Christmas Tree tier, and you get the Geek Fix podcast. And it's a lot of fun. Every single week, 2.5 hours of Aaron Sparrow and myself talk about all this kind of nonsense, as well as an entire dedicated 30 minutes to toy news. Link in the video description if that's in your wheelhouse.